I was 18 years old and living in Senegal, Africa. Some native friends, knowing of my occasional marijuana and LSD use at the time, urged me to try an amazing plant that grew in the cemetery. However, some people warned me that the plant, which they called kubijara, was extremely dangerous. I pretty much dismissed these warnings, figuring that they had never done acid. This was a mistake. One night an acquaintance dropped by my apartment, my parents' apartment, which was on the 18th floor. He had a pot and leaves from the plant. I figured we should just make a tea out of both, so we did. I drank about a cup, mixed with instant coffee. This was probably about 8 p.m. He left, not having drunk any. I can't remember the period of time after I ingested the drug, but the next thing I remember is answering the door and seeing two very grotesque monsters come into the apartment. In reality, it was my sister and her boyfriend. I had no idea I was hallucinating, unlike acid, where I'm aware of reality. I was completely unaware of reality for the next 24 hours. I was awake all night, seeing armies of insects on the kitchen floor, playing poker with people who were not there and having long conversations with dwarves under my bedclothes. This was not in the least funny. It was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I only recall bits and pieces of the night, but the parts that I recall are terrifying. I remember looking in the bathroom mirror and seeing that my pupils filled my entire iris, with no color left over at all. I had a conversation with the person in the mirror, not realizing it was me. I could not urinate, even though I desperately had to. My mouth was drier than Death Valley. I remember awaking my mother at dawn by standing at her bedside and asking if we were going to the Montreal Olympics that year. The rest of the day was a nightmare. I was continually drawn to the balcony, and when I looked over at the streets I kept seeing horrible car crashes. I could clearly see the cars crashing and hear the noise they made, plus the screams of the injured. Then planes started to crash. I saw people flying outside the balcony. Friends came and went during the day and they were all extremely alarmed at my behavior. Someone watched me carefully all day. It was only towards the next evening that I began to realize that I had done a drug and that nothing I had seen had been real. I believe I was a hair's breadth away from seizures and possibly death. I do not recommend any experiments with this drug whatsoever. I had been curious about Datura since I had first read about it in Lyceum back in '96. In '98 I was in the Caribbean at a beach house when on a walk a plant caught my attention. I looked for a second and behold it was exactly as I had seen in pictures on the internet. The long trumpet-like flowers and the little seed pods dangling near the base clued me into the fact that I had found my long-sought-after plant. I was stoked to say the least. I quickly ran and gathered a few handfuls of the leaves and took them back and stuffed them in a Ziploc bag. I took them back home with me and as soon as I got back I called my friend so that he would come sit for me and make sure I didn't do anything stupid while I was on it. I took the whole bag and boiled it in a pot with about 2 cups of water until the water boiled down to the amount that would fit a coffee mug. I strained out the leaves and made the raunchiest tasting iced tea I have ever encountered. I pinched my nose shut and had a bottle of water nearby as a chaser to down the vile concoction. About an hour later I started to feel kind of feverish and hot. And my head felt tight. I got extremely tired and decided to lie down. Then my mouth dried up worse than any weed-induced cotton mouth ever could be. It felt like I had taken a paper towel and started wiping all traces of saliva from my mouth. It was so dry that I couldn't even swallow. No amount of water alleviated this horrible dry feeling. It was like there was a thin plastic coating between the water and my tormented mouth. My throat felt like it had sandpaper grating against it. I couldn't talk above a whisper and even if my mouth had been moist I don't know if I would have had the strength to talk. Reaching to my table by my bed for water took more energy than anything ever had. It felt like I had been completely sapped of all energy and had been plunged into a fevered delirium. Then the phone rang and I had my friend answer it cause I couldn't and then my friend tried to make me talk on it and I just couldn't. All I could do was mutter under my breath. It was that really shitty feeling you get like if you're really tired after a speed binge where you have no energy to talk and someone keeps saying what? I can't hear you. And you just finally summon up all the pissed off energy you can to shout out the words you just repeated 5 times. Then after the phone call I just passed out. But here is where it gets weird. At least I thought I had passed out. Apparently I laid there with my eyes open some of the time staring off at nothing or I was asleep but the strangest part was that I kept coughing. I wasn't sick and I don't remember coughing. All fucking night long. Though I had no recollection of it my friend most definitely did. He says he punched me repeatedly to make me stop. And he had to deal with my concerned mom coming into my room and somehow he covered for me. Yet I still was coughing. I woke up to find that he was gone, but he told me what was up soon enough. What I do remember of the night is little, but it was vivid. There was this large portal in my backyard that I stepped through, and then when I entered into the darkness of it, I don't remember what happened. And also there had been some dreams I had that I thought were real stuff but hadn't happened. Like I believed one of my friends had been in a car wreck, and when I asked her about it the next day she told me she hadn't been in one. It turned out I had dreamed/hallucinated it the night before. They weren't like dreams where in the morning you remember it as a dream, it was like these things had really happened. But that was all I remembered. So I am sure there was whole night of me traveling and doing stuff in my head, but I didn't remember any of it except for a few things. The next day I couldn't focus on anything that was within arm's reach, and one other experience that was really weird happened. I took a nap and I was still feeling shitty, but my mouth wasn't as dry. So I was lying in my bed and I wanted some water. I got up out of bed and went and got a glass of water, and as I put it to my lips it disappeared and I realized I was back in bed with my eyes closed. So I got up and got water. And again it disappeared as I brought it to my lips and I was back in bed. This happened like 4 more times before I finally managed to roll in my bed and snap my eyes open to true reality. The weird thing is that it seemed so real. But all in all it was a horrible experience. I mean, I could see how it would sound cool that you would hallucinate, have real seeming lucid dreams, whatever, but it isn't at all. The physical discomfort itself is more than enough to discourage any more experimenting with the horrible effects of scopolamine. Maybe lower doses would have made it so I remembered more. But I don't know if remembering is necessarily a good thing when you're dealing with this junk.
I went to a friend's house and everyone decided it would be fun to drink Carlsbell's tea. It was about 10 o'clock at night and we had just finished heating our supper when the tea was finished boiling. We each grabbed a mug full of the yellowish liquid. There were 4 drinking the stuff including myself, and one sober babysitter added some honey and began to sip at the hot water. I was the first to feel the tea's effects. It took about 20 minutes for me to feel the drug starting to take over my senses. First thing that happened was loss of concentration. I couldn't stay still for the life of me. I was incapable of focusing at all. Then my eyelids became heavy and while the whites of my eyes became beet red. I couldn't walk without the support of a wall or someone helping me walk. I began to feel nauseous, so I lay down on my friend's couch for about 15 minutes. When I still felt nausea taking over, I decided to go to the bathroom. I thought maybe if I vomited it out I'd be fine. I wasn't. I started to feel really ill. I could barely move and I kept thinking I had to urinate. I would be standing up from going pee and as soon as my pants were up I'd get the urge to sit down and pee again. I must have done this many times and been in the bathroom for a while because my friend came and knocked on the door to see if I was alright. I told him I didn't know and left the bathroom. The 3 other guys that drank the tea were in the room howling something fierce. They were laughing cause they couldn't stand and falling over each other like it was the thing to do. I wanted so badly to be having fun like them, but it wasn't going to happen. Every time I would attempt to go to them, every time I tried to move, the nausea would increase and I'd be stuck where I was. At around 12:45 that night I had finally had enough and was starting to get a little freaked out. I told my sober friend that I needed to go home and ride it out cause I wasn't doing too hot, so he took me home. I got home and he had to help me out of his car. And after stumbling to the front door I didn't have the strength to even find my house keys. I banged on the door for what seemed like an eternity and my mom answered the door. She asked me what was wrong and I told her I was messed up and I didn't know how to stop it, so she made me go to the emergency room with her. We went to the emergency room. I was admitted and hooked up to an EKG machine, had an IV stuck in my arm, oxygen in my nose, and they even did an MRL on me. All of my vitals were normal but I was hallucinating very badly. I kept thinking I had a cigarette in my hand and every time I went to take a drag it was gone. More than once I looked around for the cigarettes thinking I had dropped it. My mom had to remind me that I was in a hospital bed and that there was no smoking there. Then I saw a bird, or I thought I saw a bird, and my mom again had to inform me of where I was at. I saw a ladybug crawling on my bed and tried to catch it with no success. I was also talking to me mom like she was one of my friends, which would not have been so bad if I wasn't actually talking about my mother. After I had said my piece, she told me, "Audrey, I am your mother." All I could say was, "You are? No way. How funny." The whole time I was in the hospital I kept trying to leave. I wanted to get up and move. I was restless and annoyed at the fact that I was stuck there. I kept trying to take my IV out of my arm. My mother, one female nurse, and two male nurses had difficulty holding me down in my bed. I just wanted to leave. Then when I was taken to get the MRI, I kept trying to climb out of the machine. My mom had to practically lay on me for them to complete the tests. I was finally released from the hospital at 6 a.m. I don't remember most of the night. The things I remember are like faraway dreams. Apparently I put my underwear on my head and was trying to take my blouse off as my mom and I left the emergency room. I don't remember being released from the hospital. I don't remember leaving my friend's house and coming home. I don't remember the drive to the hospital or getting admitted. I don't remember how I got from the hospital to my house. I don't remember more than half of what happened to me last night. It's now been close to 24 hours since I first drank the Hell's Bells tea and I'm still seeing random hallucinations. The most prominent visual is words shaking, or waving when I concentrate on reading them. I'm having difficulty writing this experience report right now. Other than that, I feel like I have a mild hangover, slight headache, upset stomach, and cotton mouth. I've never had a bad drug experience before this one and I will never touch this evil plant ever again.
Of all the myriad psychedelic experiences I have had throughout my life, I have never remembered anything so vividly as my unique trip on Datura. In retrospect, it was quite horrifying. After mincing the petals of 3 Datura flowers, boiling them, and mixing the resulting liquid with ice cubes, sugar, and Kool-Aid, a female friend, referred to here as Lauren, and I each drank half a cup of this mixture. We sat on a couch, watching a movie. A short time later, perhaps half an hour, I began experiencing shortness of breath. My heart was beating rapidly, and my thought processes had become muddled. I decided that removing my shirt and belt would help me to breathe. At this point, I walked outside and began gasping for air. Lauren walked out at some point, and I went inside with her, after the feelings of suffocation had passed. We sat together on her bed. I was feeling reprehensive about the experience thus far, but I sat patiently, doing my best to stay calm and have a conversation. Every so often I'd hallucinate that I had a lit cigarette in my hand, and attempt to take a drag off it, only to realize that it wasn't lit. At this point, I began to sink further and further into delirium. My memory of the next few hours is very hazy, and I can't be sure if any of it actually happened. When I had come back to my sense, I was in the backyard. By this time, I was quite far gone, and I began having hallucinations of people I knew. I remember quite clearly one instance where I saw a good friend of mine, Chad. We began having a dialogue. I asked him what he was doing there, and he informed me that he had taken Datura too. When I asked him why I was in the backyard and what I should do, he stopped moving. I did a double take, and he had turned into a tree. As I gazed at it, I saw a pattern in the leaves that vaguely resembled his face. I remember thinking that mistaking this pattern for a person's face seemed like a perfectly rational mistake to make, although whenever I went back to the tree, I wasn't able to discern that pattern again. I walked to the front of the house at one point. The car was gone, and I didn't know what to make of it. The house was completely locked, so, unclear as to what I should do, I decided to wait for Lauren to return. As I sat on the lawn furniture in the backyard puffing on cigarettes, I saw a starfish laying on the chair next to me. I stared at it, perplexed, for a good while. After going to check and see if Lauren had returned to her room yet, I noticed the chair again and realized that the starfish was actually a rip in the upholstery. At this point, I realized something was very wrong with me, and that I needed to get back home. I wandered through the neighborhood. A bit into my trek, I experienced amnesia, and I suddenly began looking for my house, which was several miles away. I didn't realize this, however, and began searching for landmarks from my neighborhood that I would recognize. At some point, my train of thought changed once again. I made my way out of the neighborhood, onto a sidewalk. I began walking. I would hear a cell phone ring periodically, and I'd pull it out of my pocket as if to answer it. I brought it up to my ear, and at that point I would realize that there was no cell phone in my hand, and that I didn't have one on me at all. I eventually made my way over to a well-lit plaza, and found a payphone. I waited behind a man who was using it for what seemed like 15 minutes, although I eventually realized there hadn't been anybody there to begin with. Feeling distraught, I called a family member, who eventually picked me up. Although I'm told I was brought to a hospital where I had my stomach pumped, I have no recollection of this at all, short of waking up in my bed the next morning with a throbbing headache. In summation, I can only say that although this drug produced powerful hallucinations, I was far too delirious to enjoy the experience. This was easily the worst drug-related experience I have ever had, and most certainly the single worst experience of that year of my life. I had eaten LSD, mescaline, and psychedelic mushrooms previous to this, and I was completely unprepared for the intensity of this substance. At the time of my first Datura stramonium usage I was 16 years old. I heard many stories about Datura from my friends and was eager to check out Datura myself. An experienced friend of mine got me approximately 150 very potent seeds. They were black and dark brown, but I didn't want to use them yet. I wanted to learn more about Datura, so I checked online. I've read a lot about Datura and I didn't want to eat those seeds like many people did, without a sitter and proper setting, so I waited for a chance to consume those seeds properly. I guess it would be important to note that I suffer from manic-depressive psychosis for years. For those who are not familiar with manic-depressive psychosis, let me just put it like this: for a month I feel great, like I can achieve anything I try, and I also get involved in many different activities. But then, suddenly, I start to feel really messed up. I become extremely sad and depressive. That's when the depressive psychosis is starting to hit me. When I was about 12 years old I used to cut myself with a blade when the depressive psychosis started to happen, after the manic ones, because it was just too painful state of mind. Few times I was very close to committing a suicide. At the time of acquiring Datura seeds I was in manic state of mind. Soon after acquiring Datura seeds, my manic state of mind became depressive. This was the most terrible depression ever, and it was triggered by heavy emotions of pain and loneliness. That caused me to think and act irrational, so this one Friday night I prepared my room for my first Datura trip. I removed all sharp objects from my room and got a lot of free space in it. I guessed I would want to walk around while tripping on Datura. Also, I got myself cold water. I wanted to totally fuck up my brain and to hurt myself, but I didn't want to die, or I wanted to die, but didn't want my family and friends to mourn. D+5 minutes. I ate all of those seeds on an empty stomach. They were bitter, as expected, but not too bad. I chewed them easily and used water to help me swallow. I laid on my bed to relax. D+20 minutes. I felt sharp pain in my eyes. I assumed that my pupils were dilating, so I went to the bathroom and looked at my reflection in the mirror. My pupils were extremely dilated. For an unknown reason, this was pretty entertaining for me. I got back to my room and locked the door. I hid the key, just in case of a heavy delirium. D+1 hour 10 minutes. I felt somewhat bored and tired, so I tried to sleep. I was surprised to find out that trying to sleep made me feel uncomfortable and I became very thirsty. I was aware that the Datura trip was starting to happen. I drank some water and laid back to bed. D+1 hour 15 minutes. I was looking at the wall, hoping to see changes. Soon, I noticed that shadow on the wall was starting to move slowly. It was pouring down the wall like honey. That made me feel very pleased because I knew that it was not real, although it seemed quite real, and that it was just my brain playing its own little games with my perception. Also, I saw a lot of little white flying worms which made me laugh and feel happy. T unknown. Soon after that pouring shadow I lost track of the time. Suddenly I felt a need to urinate. I found the hidden key, it took me some time to find it, and went to the bathroom. My movement was very slow, it seemed like gravity is twice stronger than before. I tried to urinate but I could barely stand. I sat on the toilet and it felt like I'm going to be stuck in it, stronger gravity sensation. I was still aware that this is just an effect caused by Datura and my brain, although it was not easy to keep that in my mind all of the time. I still couldn't urinate and it caused me pain. I only got few drops of urine out, but it wasn't nearly enough. I gave up trying, washed my hands and returned to my room. In the center of my room there was a belt. I picked it up and carried it out of my room, to the hallway. In the hallway, there was another belt. I remembered that that belt was in my room and that I carried it to the hallway. It was my younger brother's belt. I looked at the belt in my hand and then I checked that belt on the floor. It was the same belt, but it didn't seem to be a problem for me. I just left the other belt near the one that was already there and returned to my room. I've spotted another belt in the center of my room. Not a big deal, I just carried it to the hallway and left it along the other two belts and returned to my room. Again, there was a belt in the center of my room. I repeated the process about 20 times in a row. It didn't seem strange to me that the center of my room was a spawning place for my younger brother's belt. Not a bit strange. Now, there was a really large pile of belts in front of my room and I started to think, just a second, there are no bloody belts in front of my room at all. I looked at the pile of belts and it was gone. There was just one belt which I carried out of my room while cleaning it, and that was very funny for me. I was glad that Datura was messing me up and that I was making a fool out of myself. I felt stomach ache and remembered that I really have to urinate. I went to the toilet but I still couldn't do it. It made me feel rather unhappy, not sad, just unhappy, and unsatisfied. It was like when after sex I feel need to urinate, but I just can't do it. I washed my hands and returned to my room. I laid on the bed and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I felt Datura. Datura, was acting like a spoiled little girl who wants me to play with her and is not going to let me rest until I play her games. I got off the bed and took that bottle of water which I left near the wall. I started to drink the water, but the taste was bitter and disgusting. Then a sudden thought ran through my head. Dude, you didn't leave that damn bottle of water near the wall, you've left it near your bed. I felt a sudden dread confusion when I realized that there is no bottle in my hands at all. It lasted only for a moment, but it was quite scary. I fought off that sensation and drank some of the real water. That victory over such horrible and shocking sensation made me feel strong and very proud. I felt like a brave warrior who has just defeated an evil quasi-god. I've spent the rest of the night going to the bathroom, rolling over my bed and walking around my room. I woke up at about 10 in the morning. At first I felt a bit fuzzy and puzzled, but I soon remembered what has just happened and gathered as much as I could about the last night. I felt great, sober and relaxed. There was not even a smallest sign of depression. I felt my next manic phase starting, and that was extremely nice cognition. My pupils were still dilated and I couldn't read a thing for the whole day, but I didn't worry about it. I knew that this was just a Datura side effect. After this fantastic experience I've tried Datura a few times again and those trips were fine, but they can't compare to my first one. BTW, I've never again had strong depressive psychosis like I had before eating Datura seeds, and I've also stopped hurting myself. I still wonder if there is a link between Datura exp. and my weaker depressive psychosis. After hearing my friends talk about their experience with gyms and weed, I figured I would like to be able to tell a story as crazy as them. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, so I just ate one large ball, a little smaller than the size of a baseball, flesh, seeds, spikes and all. It was the most terrible tasting thing I have ever eaten in my life. After about 10 to 15 minutes or so I could feel almost like a hot poison was running through every blood vessel in my body, and I started to feel a bit strange. It was getting to be late summer and the sun was going down, and I had left my jacket at home, so I decided to run back and get it. Big mistake. Running caused my trip to accelerate, and as I was running home there was a large silent vortex forming in the middle of the road. It was starting to swallow everything that was on the opposite side of the street. It was almost like the cars and buildings were painted on a big sheet of cloth and the vortex was pulling it down, kind of like the magic trick where you pull cloth out from under dishes, into the hole. I can't remember getting to my house, but I do remember my mom finding me lying in the middle of the living room talking gibberish. Needless to say, she freaked and took me to the hospital. I guess I had told her that I was shooting heroin into the ends of my toes. She had to help me to the car because I couldn't walk, and my mouth was so dry it was painful. After I got in the passenger seat of my mom's car, people I knew were appearing to me in the space between my legs under the dashboard. They were all curled up with their knees under their chins asking me where I was going, and soon as I would start to answer them they would vanish in a puff of silver sparkles. When I reached the hospital I couldn't remember my name anymore and I could just barely understand where I was. This was the beginning of the real intense hallucinations. A lady and her kid were sitting across from me and my mom in the waiting room. At this point I was having severe audio hallucinations, although there were people talking to me all the time, but I couldn't really tell what they were saying. Every now and then I would yell "what?" at the lady and her kid. After yelling "what are you saying to me?" a couple of times, she got freaked out and left. When it was our turn to see the nurse at the front desk I could no longer walk at all and I thought my mom was a fat man that ran a French fry wagon on the roof of the hospital. When the nurse began to ask my mom questions concerning my condition I would butt in loudly saying that this French fry guy should come over and meet my mom sometime cause they looked a lot alike. The next thing I remember is sitting on a hospital bed hooked up to heart machines. I kept thinking that the heart monitors stuck to my chest were someone's headphones and that I needed to return them. I wasn't very happy being in the hospital, that is to say when I wasn't hallucinating that I was elsewhere. Note, visual and audio hallucinations were so intense I could not decipher between them and reality. Much of my reality was made up of these hallucinations, partying with my friends, sailing my yacht down the streets of London, reading ancient books in enormous libraries. So when I was cognizant of the fact that I was in a hospital, I was looking for ways to escape. I had noticed that there was a space where the walls didn't meet with the floor and I figured I could get out through there. My wife, at that time she was my girlfriend, said she can't remember how many times they had to drag me back onto the bed after finding me trying to leopard crawl my way through an imaginary space in the wall. I remember one instance when I was sitting on the bed where I could hear a very loud rusty screeching noise. Out of the tops of my eyes I could see a garage door opening in my forehead. Once it was up and had retracted back into my skull, small black triangles started flying out of my head, hundreds of them. I then looked over at my girlfriend and asked her why she was crying so much. At that point in time I couldn't remember her name and she appeared to be a fat balding man with a greenish atomic glow. Sometime after that I met a friend for the first time that night which would stay with me for the remaining 3 days of my insanity. He was a small albino chihuahua with a large Cheshire cat type smile and red eyes. He was always asking me if I wanted a smoke, but his mouth never moved and he was always smiling. Whenever he went off to find me smokes he would always return a couple of minutes later with a single gum ear hanging out of his pointed tooth smile. The aggravating thing was that every time I would light one and take a drag it would immediately burn all the way down to the brown filter and melt into hot orange wax all over my hand. My memories of this trip are very fragmented. I can only recall certain things I had done in the 3 days that I forgot my name. I remember nurses asking me by name, "Rob, do you remember your name?" And I would answer, "Of course I don't. Stop asking such stupid questions." One time my girlfriend was asked to bring me into the bathroom to help get a urine sample out of me, but when she went to help Mr. Happy Pants out of his house I smacked her hand away violently, thinking that it had been a hungry cat. I can't really remember leaving the hospital with my mom, but I do remember that strange green fat man sitting beside me in the back seat crying his face off because I couldn't remember who he was. Ha ha ha. That's about all I can remember. I think I came close to a lethal dose that night. I definitely had the symptoms of being poisoned. Even having moisture from ice chips touch my tongue was enough to make me cry from pain. I highly recommend using caution when taking this substance. I think I just got lucky. I was headed into a downward spiral the second I took a hit off my friend's pipe about 3 years ago. I didn't give a shit though, I loved it. So I was always getting stoned, and doing anything that was available to me. I had dropped out of school because I decided it was just a waste of my time, so I spent all day at home every single day, smoking weed, drinking, downing bottles of cough syrup, just about anything that would end soberness. So I was always online looking for new stuff to try, and I came upon Datura. I had heard about it a couple times, but everyone I know calls it goofballs. I had remembered my friend R had been talking about how some grew in his backyard, and his dog had eaten one and stared at the wall barking for like 5 hours. So I was like, hell, why not? If it fucked the dog up, it could be fun. R happened to live just a little ways up the street about 5 minutes away. So I smoked a bowl, and walked up there. I hopped his wall, and there it was, right in front of me. There was no seed pods on it though, so I just grabbed a handful of leaves, being stoned and paranoid that his neighbors would see me, and hopped back over. I walked back and smoked a cigarette wondering if this was the right thing and if so, would the leaves do anything? So I got home, and right away went into the kitchen and poured a couple cups of water into a pan, and threw in all the leaves, probably 8 or 10, and turned on the stove. I sat there and stirred for a while, and watched the water evaporate. I added a little bit more water and waited. It evaporated quickly, and the leaves were beginning to fall apart. So I took them out, and poured the little bit of greenish-brown liquid into a measuring cup. It ended up being about 1/4 of a cup. I made a quick cup of coffee, and mixed the liquid in. I sat at my computer desk and downed the coffee. It really didn't taste like anything at all, just coffee. After finishing the cup, I got up and went to watch TV for a while. After about 10 minutes I was wondering if it was working, so I got up to get some water, and immediately my legs felt really weird. I was kind of off balance, and a little bit lightheaded. So I smiled and decided that I had gotten the right thing and it was working. I went and sat back down on my couch, and watch TV to wait for the full effects to come on. A few minutes later I looked up from the TV and R was walking down my hallway. He told me we had to go to the grocery store. I live about a 20-minute walk from it, so I was like alright, let's go. So me and R started walking up the highway towards it, having long conversations the whole time about stuff that had happened in the past and why we were going to the store. He said he needed to cash his check from work so he could buy an eighth, which was weird because R had smoked weed once and had puked in the corner of my friend's backyard, then started crying about how he had let all kinds of people down, but I was too fucked up to notice, so I was like, oh hell yeah man, I know this sick guy that sells some dank ass shit, so we made plans to call him right after we cashed his check. We got there and walked inside, and right as I got in there, I completely forgot why I came to the store, and R was gone, so I just figured he had left. So I walked around a little and saw another one of my friends, D. I started talking to him about how I came up here with R, but then he left and so I was just hanging out. We had a little conversation, and D told me to look at something, so I turned to look, and when I turned back D was gone and a lady with her 2 kids was just looking at me from a few feet away like, what the hell is this kid on? So I smiled and waved at her, and went to a different aisle. When I got to the next aisle, my friend N came walking up. I had known N since we were like 3, so he was one of my really good friends. I saw him and was like, oh shit dude, what are you doing here? He replied saying that he was here to buy a new scuba suit. At that point I was about an hour and a half into the trip, so it's pretty safe to say I was gone. So and needing to buy a new scuba suit seemed reasonable as hell. I told him we should both go scuba diving in the Rio Grande. I live in New Mexico and my house is about 2 minutes from the river. So we set off through the store to find the scuba gear. After about probably half an hour of just walking around talking about how fat R was, and how I had jacked him of his goofballs, we decided to sit down. So we went to the nearest table, and I looked down to make sure nothing was on the chair. When I looked up, N was gone, so I decided he probably had to go back to school. I got up and went wandering around for a little longer, when suddenly I had this feeling that I had a half of some white widow sitting in my room. Extremely excited at the thought of this, I ran off the store and all the way home, somehow managing to get across the busy highway and not get hit. I got home and didn't remember why I had run all the way here, so I sat and smoked a cigarette. Okay, sounds like a safe, kind of weird, little trip, right? Wrong. This is where things get crazy. I don't remember everything, just little bits and pieces past that point. Next thing I remember was my mom coming home and yelling at me asking why I had no clothes on. And I just mumbled some shit about how I had to take them off cause it was hot and the air conditioner had been towed off by some cowboy in a red van. Yeah, she pretty much knew I was on something right then and there. So she asked what I had taken, and I told her it was this stuff from R's yard and he had sold it to me for $10. She kind of freaked out and started asking me all these questions, but I just walked off trying to find my cell phone, which was later found in the door of the refrigerator. She called over my neighbor who was a few years older than me and had a past of pretty heavy drug use, but quit to be a preacher. He told her he had no idea what I had taken, and after a few minutes of trying to figure it out by asking me and getting a bunch of shit about how I had bought this stuff from R because it fucked his dog up, so I made 4 liters of tea out of it and went to the store to go scuba diving. Needless to say, he got nothing, and went back home. So the next thing I remember is my dad coming home and me having a psychotic episode thinking he was the devil and trying to choke him, and him having to throw me to the ground and sit on my till I calmed down. At that point my mom thought I should probably go to the hospital because she could see my heart beating out of control, and nobody could figure out what I had taken. So she put pants and a shirt on me, and dragged me to the car. I got in and refused to keep my seatbelt on. So the next thing I can remember is being in the hospital, ripping the fourth out of my arm, and ranting and raving about how I should not be here and I just want a cigarette. After that my memory is gone completely. My parents say I was putting my hand up to my lips like I was smoking a joint or a cigarette, but nothing was really there. My friend N came to see me, he was actually there this time, and later told me I was saying that I couldn't pee because there was a little fairy waiting for me to take my eyes off of her so she could push me off the top of a building. There was one little thing I remembered after all that. The nurses were only letting one of my friends come in to see me at a time, and 2 of them were there. N and my other friend S. So N would come in and leave, and S would come in for a minute. But the thing I remember was seeing both of them and this girl V come walking in all at the same time, which my mom told me was impossible due to the nurses allowing only one at a time. So that was weird. But after 3 days in the hospital tripping out, I finally got sober, and I just wanted to go home. We were waiting for the nurse to come back and tell me what was gonna happen. I was thinking it was Saturday, and I wanted to go skate, But my mom told me it was Wednesday. So after a while the nurse came in, and she said they had found marijuana and speed in my body, so they thought I was depressed. She told me I was gonna be sent to a rehab center a few miles away for a little while. I got pissed. I sat up and was like, no, fuck you, I'm not depressed, and I'm not going to a fucking rehab center. You can suck my dick, fuck you. She told me I better calm down or she was gonna get security. That just pissed me off even more and I started yelling, fuck you bitch. You can send the fucking pigs, they won't fucking catch me. Fuck you. And I jumped up and just ran for my life. Every door I got to was locked for some stupid fucking reason, so I kept turning around and going the other way. As I turned away from another locked door, I saw a cop walking quickly in my direction. I tried to run around him but he grabbed me. I started screaming and yelling and telling him I wanted a fucking lawyer, and he was just like, oh, you'll get one. He called for backup since he could barely keep me in his arms. Adrenaline is a great thing, and 2 more pigs came in and grabbed my feet and arms and carried me out of the hospital and into the back of a cop car. So to shorten this up, I ended up going to rehab for about 3 days, then lying my way out saying I would never do drugs again. The day I got out I went to the skate park and my friend S showed up with an offering me a bowl. Haha, fuck not doing drugs, too boring. But I never touched Datura again. So that's my story. As a naive and foolish teenager I decided to try Datura. To my amazement I found it growing up and down the west coast very easy to identify. The following are brief accounts of several occasions starting with the first time I tried it while on a trip to Baja California with my church youth group. While walking in the Baja desert I found what was undeniably Datura, although I don't know which kind. It appeared to be the same kind that I later found growing all over California as far north as Sacramento. At any rate, I ate an entire fresh seed pod, seeds only, one night in the month of August while on this trip to Baja. Not much happened that night aside from a head change, blurred vision, and dryness of mouth. A night or two later, while drifting into sleep, I had a startling and scary experience, which through subsequent experiences with her, I am now able to attribute to the effects of the Datura. As I drifted into a hypnagogic state, I began to experience the normal slide and fall that sometimes startles one awake. However, this time, before the slide and fall sensation, came an electric buzz starting at the base of my spine, traveling almost instantaneously up to the center of my brain, ending with a crackling pop. There in the center of my head. At that very same instant I felt as though suddenly there was another body lying on top of me, and that I could no longer move. I tried to breath or wiggle, anything, but for a few brief and terrifying moments I was paralyzed. This passed within seconds. Only through sheer will was I able to jolt myself back awake. I don't know the cause of this phenomenon and have never experienced it the day of ingestion of the plant, always the day after or later. It is not pleasant but very frightening to feel as though you've stopped breathing and can't move. On the way home from Baja California while sleeping at a church for the night in San Diego, I drank vodka, smoked a small amount of pot, a couple hits, and smoked a few bowls full of the same Datura leaves I had found in Baja. All I remember is that I lost control. I could not speak logically but spoke nonetheless. I vaguely remember telling gargantuan whoppers about the most mundane things. A concerned peer of mine sat and watched over me. I told lie after nonsensical lodge. None of what I was saying was true or made logical sense. Furthermore, I had lost control of what I was saying. It just came out. I have few memories from that night. I was delirious. Another time, I smoked a lot of fresh leaves from Baja with some friends in Willits, California. We sat in my room smoking and felt a euphoria that drove us to jump up and dance. We saw in hues of red and had a definite head change. In the next few days, I continued my smoking of the leaves on a number of occasions. The effects seemed varied and unpredictable. At one point, during this Datura binge, between smokes, when I was sober for all intensive purposes, all of a sudden I experienced intense visions of my father bursting into my room on fire. These visions were in my head, in other words they weren't true hallucinations, but the clarity and color of the visions in my imagination, the pressing nature of them as well as the anxiety and fear that came on with them made the experience mildly traumatic. I could not stop obsessing over the visions. They just popped into my head. Another time, I ate an entire seed pod and smoked a bowl of pot along with it. I became delirious, not knowing really where I had just been but somehow getting to where I was going. not able to track my thoughts or speech from one second to the next, so much so that coherent thought and speech became impossible again. I had reached the nonsense and lies level of expression. I even hallucinated briefly that I could see every pore of the sidewalk I was walking on and could see some clear ore of sorts flowing from the tips of my fingers into these cement pores. Probably my last experience ever on Datura came when I was 18 and in college. I picked a bag of leaves along the Sacramento American River bike trail. I went with a friend to a lake and creek some 40 minutes away from town. We hiked along a creek and smoked the leaves as we went. We became exhausted and dehydrated, not to mention extremely lethargic. We didn't hallucinate and overall felt quite uncomfortable, as though we had downed a bunch of over-the-counter antihistamines. I drove, definitely a bad idea, us back home to my friend's house. Somehow I managed to stay awake for the entire drive. We sat and watched movies with some other friends while continuing to feel lethargic, groggy, dehydrated and overall dysphoric. Later, we had no complete memories of the whole day. Huge gaps in what we had said and did as reported by our other friends were gone from our memory. Nothing outrageous had occurred. We just couldn't remember what we had done other than the vague timeline of events as I have told them now. In all these experiences I experienced blurred vision for 3 days after ingesting or smoking the plant material. The worst cottonmouth anyone could ever hope to experience was also a hallmark symptom of the poisoning. Occasional closed-eye visions accompanied these trips as well as stronger bouts of delirium, disordered thoughts, total short-term memory loss, and amnesia as well. A bizarre and unpredictable plant indeed. I would hesitate before ever trying this again. On a side note, I have not ever experienced any psychotic episodes nor do I come from a family with any history of psychosis, i.e. I attribute the effects I felt mainly to the Datura plant itself. I was with a few friends one night when I saw a plant with small cactus pods. I remembered having heard about it before when I was a few years younger. They were called Jimson weed. The word around the campfire was that if you cut open the pod and let the seeds dry out, they will turn brown and be edible. I had never heard anything about dosage, although, I seem to recall hearing something about eating no more than half a pod, though I am unsure if that was when I first discovered Datura or after my friends took it at my first encounter with it. Anyway, I took a few pods off the plant and decided to share them with other psychonauts I knew. I could not find the few people I knew would have tried it, so I dried out a couple pods. Anyway, a couple days later I saw that the seeds had turned noticeably brown. At about 7 p.m., I swallowed about half a pod, which I estimated to contain about 280 to 320 seeds. I guess about 2 hours had passed until I started to feel the effects. I had no idea what to expect. I was watching something on TV with the lights off. I started to feel disappointed. I got up to get a drink, or something, and I felt very heavy and lost my balance when I stood up. I remember telling myself, wow, I am flying. I am really flying. The enthusiasm about flying came from my previous notions about powerful drugs like that. They will make you feel like you can fly. At that pseudo-aerial moment the feelings were pleasant and euphoric until a vicious feeling of a cottonmouth hit me. I glided to the sink and got a drink. A few seconds later I had the same cottonmouth. I had terrible balance and poor depth perception, greatly reduced ability to know how far away anything was from my grasp. My friend Chris came home and didn't seem to notice anything was awry. Then my mom came home. It must have been near 8 now. It was November at the time and quite cold in Woodstock, Canada. I had been seeing some fast, black dots streaking across the room like a fly buzzing around. I remarked to my mom and Chris that I thought it amazing that flies are still buzzing around this late into November. I thought they all would have frozen. They had no idea what I was talking about. The next thing I remember after my flies in November observation was putting somebody's boot on the countertop and inserting various items like a pencil, a salt shaker, crackers, a fork, a small booklet and other small objects, into the boot. I can only remember telling my mom and Chris that I had some purpose to my actions, that it was a vital task I had to undertake. After I put all the random objects into the boot I put it back on the shoe mat, carefully and methodically. After that I stumbled to the fridge and became frustrated after attempting to grab a hold of the fridge handle. I could not sense how far away the handle was. I finally got it, flustered and nearly exhausted from so many failed attempts to open it. I just stared listlessly into the fridge and grabbed a carton of soy milk. I looked at it, astonished at what I was holding. With my eyes wide open and mouth ajar as if I had just prevented a lit cigarette in my dustbin from igniting some tissues and newspapers on fire, I asked Chris, "Wow, Chris. Where did I get this?" "The fridge," he said. At this point they still didn't grasp the seriousness of just how stoned I was. They were aware that I was acting strangely, but couldn't think of anything that would have had that effect on me. My mom was a bit worried and deduced that I must have taken something, and told Chris to keep an eye on me. It must have been around 9:30 to 10, about 2 or 3 hours into the ordeal, when I found myself in the bathroom, several times, as I kept walking in and out after completing some job. I remember holding an oval soap dish with a brown and golden ancient Egyptian border around it. I kept trying to wash it off and then I would place it on its side when I finished. Chris was standing at the bathroom door the whole time without my noticing him, just watching what I was doing the way someone would watch a physical altercation unfolding across a parking lot, waiting to see if it would become serious or violent before getting involved. Every once in a while I would realize he was there and tell him that things needed to be cleaned and that there was some problem in the bathroom. The most severe, if that is the right word, thing I remember from that night was walking into the bathroom again. I looked at the mirror and noticed I had a small, white stain on my Jimi Hendrix t-shirt. I tried to rub it off and remarked to the stranger in the mirror that we had the same stain. Just seconds later I pointed out that we also had the same shirt. I became quite irritated and defensive about this imposter in my bathroom and bitterly said to him, "Get the fuck out of my house. What are you doing in my house? Dude, you need to get the fuck out, now." Chris just watched in shock. Who could ever have imagined it possible for a person to forget his own reflection? And then become enraged at it, too? He calmed me down and assured me that I was overreacting. I have no memory of what I did immediately after that. I think I blacked out, but I was still walking around. My memory seemed to have shut off. The next thing I remember, quite suddenly, as if my memory had been turned on again, was standing in the bathroom looking at my mum as she extracted a body towel, a hand towel and a face cloth from the toilet. I had no idea what was going on. She looked really worried about me. She kept asking Chris what I took but he didn't know either and they couldn't get any sensible answer from me. I have a very vague memory of having some complex purpose for putting the towels in the toilet. During all this, by the way, I had still had the savage dry mouth, so I had been drinking water periodically. At around 12:30 a.m., 5.5 hours after I had ingested the seeds, I had still been plagued by the abrasive cotton mouth, and by a painfully full bladder because of all the water I had drunk to quench it. I had not been able to urinate at all during the peak effects or during any of my adventures in the bathroom. All the water had added up and hurt my bladder immensely. I could not manage even a small drop of urine despite the obvious need to do so. I am not sure how much time passed after the incident with the towels, but my best guess is about 1.52 hours. During the night's final stages my sense of identity returned along with my motor coordination, but I began to have unpleasantly vivid, tactile hallucinations of translucent spiders with long, curly tails composed of what seemed like fishing line. They had made me very agitated and paranoid because they had been crawling up the walls, on the floor around me, up my legs, in my hair and up the curtains. There were not swarms of them, as you might have inferred, but roughly a dozen or more visible at any moment. I became quite distressed about the situation because they felt very real. Wherever I looked I could see that their long, cumbersome tails had been making them very clumsy as they crawled. The hallucinations were so overwhelmingly vivid and tactile because whenever I stepped on their tails they elusively tripped up, or got snagged beneath my feet and struggled to go anywhere, whether along the floor, or up the walls. The sensations were so tactile that I felt itchy as they stumbled up my arms and legs. I was not scared or overly distraught, or anywhere near panicking, as one would assume, but paranoid and overwrought. I compulsively scanned the room for them and tried to see where they had all come from. They had been combing the room like white smoke, everywhere I looked. My mood changed from being densely agitated to immensely irritated by them. After repeated attempts from anxiety to squash them with my feet, my vengeful efforts to rid my home of these clumsy, hybrid creatures led me to summon my dog Lucy for help. I commanded her to get them, and pointed to them, floundering and limping beneath her snout. She just wagged her tail as she sniffed the floor, frantically trying to get what I was pointing at and then promptly returned to her original position to listen to whatever I said. The next day, Chris told me I had been talking to Lucy seriously, as if she were conversing with me and satisfying my curiosity about whatever topic. She followed me everywhere I went, always at my heels or sat attentively in front of me. There was one point during my experience, despite the distressing hallucinations that absorbed me, when I realized with a small degree of deliberate cognizance, Lucy's bizarre, who's calling who bizarre, behavior and sense that she knew something was wrong with me. She had a concerned, penetrating look in her eyes every time I had stopped wandering. Once again the agonizing urge to urinate brought me back to the bathroom. I could still see the spiders climbing everywhere. I must have stood at the toilet with my pants down for 20 minutes, or more, while I tried to pee. I was too distracted by all the spiders struggling to climb up the toilet bowl. I flushed the toilet and they all managed to stay on the surface of the water. Eventually I started to pee, painfully and only a little at first. It definitely wasn't a situation I would want anybody seeing. I think the determination to drown the spiders in piss made myself able to finally pee. I had such a long, orgasmic emission, perhaps the longest I have ever had. After that I went to bed, brought Lucy up, and had a conversation with her about work. I don't know how long I had been conversing with her when I suddenly came to my senses and said to myself, "What the fuck is wrong with me?" I was just talking to my dog, and laughed. I was very glad when that was over. Would I do it again? Yes, now that I know what to expect. Next time I will have ice cubes at my disposal to relieve the dry mouth, this way I won't have to drink copiously. I was uneasy about dosage with what I had read out on the web about Jimson weed, Datura anoxia, so I made tea out of 1 ounce of the root. I kept it on the stovetop in a saucepan covered in water on medium/low to medium for 2.5 hours. I kept it below a boil and added water whenever it got too low, being sure to stir occasionally. Eventually I reduced it to about a coffee cup full of liquid and strained out all the root fragments. I strained it all through a coffee filter to be sure I had all the actual plant material out. I sat and watched a movie while I drank the tea, which wasn't really horrible but didn't taste too good. I thought that I had not gotten enough of a dosage, as all I was really feeling was a speed-like body high. I was having trouble walking, kind of like the robot walk you get on DXM. I had no balance and very poor motor control. I lurched instead of walked. One leg would shoot forward and try to pull me along. I'd run into things and fall into the wall next to me. My thinking must have gotten weird because I got a snack and I was wearing my bite plate. I had put it in thinking I was going to go to bed soon, maybe an hour after drinking, and forgot it was in when I started eating. The bit plate is a plastic insert that fits over my top row of teeth to prevent my teeth from grinding together while I sleep, kind of like a football mouth guard. I ate a bowl of soup and some chips without really realizing that I should have taken it out if I was going to eat. I had to stop eating the chips because my mouth was terribly dry no matter how much water I'd wash the chips down with. It felt like my mouth was completely dry whenever I tried to chew the chips. I was feeling a little poorly so I went to bed. I couldn't sleep and I kept getting up to go to the bathroom. My motor skills worsened and my thoughts got real fuzzy. I dropped a large container of vitamins in my bathroom and kept dropping them over and over again when I tried to pick them up. The container finally opened and went everywhere. There were about 360 vitamins in the container. I picked up all of them I saw, but every time I came back to the bathroom I'd see them all over again and pick them up. I had to have picked all of them up 9 or 10 times. At one point I remember breaking a glass bottle on the bathroom floor by dropping it, but I don't think it actually happened. I couldn't find any broken glass later and I had no glass bottles in the apartment to break. My eyes started focusing weird and I couldn't read. The letters would fuzz out and I couldn't get them to make sense anyway. I talked to a friend of mine while I was in the bathroom. He was a friend who would come over late with his girlfriend a lot late and crash at my place. I couldn't quite remember them having gotten there or why they were crashing that night, but I couldn't quite talk right enough to ask them. I would be looking in the bathroom mirror and suddenly notice him standing behind me in the mirror. At one point I was talking to his girlfriend who was standing next to me in the bathroom. I don't remember anything I said to them. I'd get startled looking into the mirror and seeing someone before I'd realize that it was me. Sometimes I was sure that the me in the mirror wasn't doing the exact same things that I was doing. The next morning I awoke in my boxers and my bedroom door was closed like I usually do when my friend and his girlfriend stay over. I didn't really worry about waking up in my boxers. This friend and his girlfriend would have understood if I had done weird stuff under the influence. I came out of my room and saw heaps of bed clothing on the couch. The bathroom door was closed. I figured one of them was still asleep and the other one was using the bathroom. I didn't hear anything. Whoever was in the bathroom was in there for a while, so I figured they were taking a shower. Eventually I went into the living room and no one was on the couch. I knocked on the bathroom door and no one answered. I opened it and found a towel on the floor. I figured they had gotten up before me, taken a shower and split. The stuff in my shower was all rearranged. My nearly empty tube of toothpaste had been cut up into little triangles like a paper doll. Some of the triangles were on the bathroom counter but most were mixed into my laundry hamper. Then I noticed my front door was locked from the inside. If they had left I had to have let them out and just not remembered. I called my friend and found out they had never come over at all. I had to have hallucinated them having been there, but it wasn't like a normal hallucination. It was so concrete that I never would have expected it to not be real. I talked to them and they had talked back. My kitchen floor had dried coffee all over it, as did one of my counters and one of my cabinet doors. My socks turned out to be in a cupboard where I normally keep my coffee, and I hadn't even been wearing socks the night before. My pants were in the front hall coat closet. My cell phone was in the refrigerator door. I didn't have any memory of doing any of those things. All the next day I wasn't quite right. Things had a buzzing halo around them. When I'd stare off into space I'd start seeing clear waves swirling around in the air of the room, kind of like waves of heat off a radiator. I kept hearing people say things, like someone call out. When I'd try to read, which was still difficult and fuzzy, I'd see people in movement out of the corner of my eyes. I very distinctly saw a man walk through my kitchen, but I was alone in the apartment. I tried to take a nap at one point, but I kept thinking I was reading a book on intellectual property law. I'd struggle through a chapter, which was coherent and made sense, only to open my eyes like I'd rested them briefly to learn I wasn't holding a book. Eventually I got myself together enough to go down to my fitness room and work out. By the next day I was perfectly normal. I started using Datura last summer. I started out eating small amounts of seeds, 10, then 20, then 30 and so on. I later learned this is a good idea because you can't tell the potency of random Datura just by looking/smelling/tasting it, and because it's impossible to predict an individual's tolerance. Around 50 seeds I started getting sick, so I knew I was getting in the ballpark. I boiled 100 seeds for 15 minutes, then drank all the juice and ate most of the seeds. This stuff tastes horrible. It's hard to eat a lot of it. My body has some sort of super aversion. This caused me to trip for about 18 hours, with maybe 30 hours of noticeable mental after effects. The trip was just a basic Datura trip similar to the other trips listed on Aroid. I experienced telepathy too. After that I started smoking the seeds and leaves a lot. The seeds generally produce an indescribable feeling of weirdness and a perceptual emphasis on vision. For the greatest effect, you have to hold the lighter over the seeds and take big deep hits till you feel your throat start to burn from something other than the smoke. The feeling I got from the seeds was never really enjoyable, so after a dozen times I stopped. I started smoking the leaves thinking they were less potent. I smoked about 2 grams a week for 3 months. What I noticed is a pretty sharp increase in effects with each successive time I smoked. The initial effects were general feelings of weirdness, gravitational pulls coming from stuff, visual distortion, Datura stoned. Being Datura stoned feels like you're both very stoned and dreaming. This is a trance state. Now though, whenever I smoke it the gravitational pull becomes almost overwhelming, causing me to lie down. I feel feelings of fire/energy/electricity in random parts of my body or all over my body. This is not uncomfortable, nor is this pleasant, it's just unusual. Music is overwhelmingly powerful for me while Datura stoned, many times more than while on acid. The last 2 times I smoked I looked at the sky for what felt like 30 seconds and was interrupted by my friend poking me asking if I was still alive because I hadn't moved in over 15 minutes. Also, its power is greatly increased, 2-3x, if used in conjunction with high-quality marijuana. I took the seeds a couple more times too. On about 100 seeds I experienced what could be called threshold delirium. I couldn't remember anything that just happened and I kept slipping in and out of sleep/dreams. Basically I had no concept of what was real and what was a dream. This lasted for maybe 6 hours. On about 600 seeds I experienced a ton of audio/visual/tactile hallucinations for 4 days. I also felt very sick afterwards for a day, and was just generally bizarre for 2 days, slow moving, small attention span. Although some people may disagree with me, I've found the best manner for inducing delirium is to boil up about 150 of the black mature seeds. The seeds turn black as the seed pods get older and get ready to open, for 20 minutes, then drink the juice and eat the seeds. I try and drink the juice in one gulp, followed by some sort of chaser. Orange juice works good. Ick, this stuff is horrible. The taste lasts for like 5 minutes too. Then I start swallowing the seeds using a small amount of water to wash it down. The best way to get Datura stoned is to mix the older larger leaves in a 2-to-1 ratio with the best marijuana you can find. Warnings: good God, be careful when eating the seeds. Always have someone watching you who can physically overpower you if necessary. When I eat the seeds I often get a completely dry mouth and the inability to drink water. My throat constricts painfully if I try to drink. I often piss all over myself too. It's kind of unavoidable unfortunately. I can't get the normal effects of marijuana anymore, which is good for me really since I don't like it. Whenever I smoke even a little bit of good marijuana I get Datura stoned. Whenever I take acid within a minute I start feeling Datura stoned, it usually goes away within 10 minutes. I started taking acid after I started taking Datura, so I don't know what normal acid is like, but whenever I take acid I get feelings that none of my friends do, namely, I don't hallucinate, I feel a feeling like acid in my blood. It's not really similar to the Datura fire, it's slightly uncomfortable. I also feel feelings of pressure and energy in my body that are uncomfortable. I also get the idea that the acid and the Datura in my system are fighting, and don't like each other. When I take kava I get very lightly Datura stoned. I have Datura stoned flashbacks sometimes late at night. This is pretty rare and doesn't last more than 15 minutes. I take things out of my pockets and break them while Datura tripping. The first time I Datura tripped I intentionally cut my leg with a broken glass because I wasn't being watched. An interesting side note, I used to get sick, cold symptom things, could be allergy I'm not sure, about 5 days per month. Since I started smoking the Datura leaves, 4 months ago, I haven't gotten sick once. If you're a heavy believer in mind affects health then the same attitude change that caused me to start taking Datura could be what's keeping me healthy. I don't know why I no longer get sick. I'm kind of worried I permanently messed up my brain.
I am 15 years old. If you were to ask anyone to describe my relationship with drugs, they would tell you I am one who is down for anything. Any drug you place in front of me I will take it with no regards for what could happen to me, which isn't something to be proud of at all. It was a typical Saturday afternoon with my friends. Me and my friend had some carcinogens. We all drove down to the park, where everyone goes to smoke, drink, do pills or whatever. It's just the hangout spot for kids trying to get messed up. That day we saw some kids that were friends with my friends, and they told us about this plant. They called it hell's bells. I have heard of it before, but I wasn't too sure on what it was or the effects of it. They told us they had taken it earlier that day, and the one kid was still very out of it. He was running around the field chasing a dog who obviously wasn't even really there. They told us at first you feel doped out on pills, then you feel drunk and are unable to walk, then you start hallucinating. Me eager to experience the drug that sounded so wonderful to me, we asked them where we could get it. So me and 2 of my guy friends walked up the road and picked a few of the pods. Round green prickly pods, right out of someone's front yard. At first we thought the boy had told us take only 2 seeds, so all 5 of us took 2 seeds each, and waited about a half hour. Well, a half hour later we all realized nothing had happened. We were all just as we were prior to taking the yellow seeds, so one of the boys called up the other kid and said, "Look, we each ate 2 seeds and nothing has happened." The kid told us we were supposed to eat 1 or 2 pods, so we went back and got more. The boys were skeptical about it, so me and my friend, a girl, ate a pod each. There had to be at least over 100 seeds inside. I was scared after doing this, so I decided to get drop off at home before the plant has kicked in, just in case the trip I was about to experience wasn't what I wanted. I was so happy I had decided to get dropped off when I did. About a half hour to an hour later, I started feeling a little out of place, still sober, but not quite with it. I had walked around my house stumbling into walls laughing thinking this is fun. Then I found my way into the bathroom, and that is where the worst experience of my life began. I didn't feel right at all, so I decided to try and sleep. I would lay down for like 3 seconds and get up real fast, then lay down again and get up, tossing and turning, not knowing what to do. I went back to the bathroom and crawled around on all 4s in a circle, for this was the only thing calming down. I looked at my arms, they were a beet red. I finally got up and walked down the hall. Next thing I know I fell out front of my grandmother's bedroom door and her door swung open. My aunt and grandmother came rushing out of their rooms asking me what I was on, but I had no idea and couldn't even think straight. My aunt told me to lay down, but all I could do was crawl in that one big circle as I was doing before. I don't remember what happened next, but my grandmother told me my aunt came in my room looking for me. but I had made my way into the bathroom, my pants were down to my ankles, and there was blood everywhere. They had drove me to the hospital for they didn't know if I had already overdosed, or if I went to sleep would I wake up. They said as I was on the lawn, while they were trying to get me into the car, I would just stand there and look at the lights on the car and kept saying, "I'll look at the pretty lights." They had taken me to the hospital, which I have no recollection of, and they said that I kept walking behind the nurse's station insisting that I had dropped something, that I wouldn't get into the wheelchair, that I kept trying to grab things that weren't there, that I was grabbing onto the doctor's leg. I swore I was asleep the whole time, but they told me I was awake. They said I was cursing at everyone, telling the nurses that I would F them up. The doctor came into my room yelling at me saying I'm not the only patient they have, and I would yell at him saying, "Did I ask for you people to come to my rescue?" I remember I couldn't comprehend I was in a hospital. I kept asking my mom why did mom rearrange her bedroom? But my mom kept trying to explain that I was in fact in the emergency room. I thought there were bugs all over my bed, that the railing of the bed were snakes. I thought all my friends were in the room, but it was only me and my mom. I thought the wall behind me was all cuckoo clocks, or clocks you would see in like a Dr. Seuss movie or something. I kept trying to rip out my irises, or jump out of bed that they had to keep calling security. I remember freaking out on security asking him, "Why are you in my bedroom, get out." And I remember him saying, If you get back in bed I'll leave, okay?" And I said sure, whatever. I got back in bed, but sure enough he didn't leave. Then I remember there was one nurse, I absolutely hated. Every time she came near me, I'd start screaming. I remember kept thinking I was smoking a cigarette, and every time I opened my eyes it would just vanish. Then they came in with a cup of charcoal, and tried making me drink it, and there was one nurse there who I liked, but only one. Every other nurse or doctor who came near me I'd start freaking out. The nurse I liked promised me if I drank the charcoal she would go smoke a cigarette with me, but I didn't drink it, and they had to stick the tube down my nose twice. 6 doctors and nurses holding me down, as I'm screaming and pushing and turning in my bed. The pain was unbearable. I had finally calmed down after they did that. Then I kept having to pee, because everything you drink just goes right through you. My mom told me I got so bad that I wouldn't even wipe myself, I would just throw the toilet paper, and I kept trying to flush the toilet, but it was them toilets that can't flush, that just sit at the side of the bed. My heart rate was 150, and from there I got sent to Children's Hospital in West Philly. The hallucinations lasted for 2 days, and I couldn't even read the menu to order the food they wanted me to. I swore the hospital was playing music that you would hear on the radio, like Young Jock, or Dr. Dre and stuff like that. Then through the middle of the night my heart rate went down to 40. I would get really dizzy, and dehydrated. I was in the hospital for 3 days, and I'm always the type of person who does a drug, and says, "Oh, you'll never do that again." Then go back and do it the next day. But Datura, hell's bells, is a drug I assure you, I will never come in contact with again, and I hope no one ever gets the urge to try it, because I'm one of the lucky ones, who has no permanent damage from this, thank God.